When the cell door closes forever. Lessons from the world's most feared prison, ADX Florence. Smash the like button like it owes you money. Subscribe if you're not afraid of the dark. And leave a comment, because once this story starts, there's no turning back. The sirens screamed through the Colorado night as the convoy cut through the empty highway, red and blue lights tearing holes in the darkness. Armored vehicles. Federal escorts. Helicopters hovering low enough to rattle windows. Inside the lead transport van sat a man the government no longer trusted to exist among other humans. His wrists were chained. His ankles were shackled. His eyes stared forward, unblinking. The destination was carved into the mountains ahead, a concrete fortress the locals barely spoke about. ADX Florence. This was where the system sent people when ordinary prisons failed. When walls, guards, and rules weren't enough. When a name alone caused riots, murders, or nationwide fear. Officially, this transfer was routine. Unofficially, it meant the world was about to erase someone without killing them. Years earlier, the crime that led here had unfolded in chaos. A carefully planned attack. Multiple victims. No hesitation. Investigators later said it wasn't rage, it was precision. The suspect, once arrested, showed no remorse. During interrogation, he smiled at the silence, answering questions with questions, studying the detectives instead of the other way around. One agent would later say, "It felt like he was already somewhere else. Somewhere colder." The trial was swift but heavy. Evidence stacked high. Witnesses shaken. The verdict came down like a hammer. Life imprisonment. No parole. But even maximum security prisons weren't enough. Within months, reports surfaced. Coded messages passed through walls. Guards manipulated. Other inmates threatened without a single word spoken. Violence followed him like a shadow. That was when the order came down. ADX Florence wasn't designed for rehabilitation. It was designed for containment. A last stop. A place where influence dies. As the gates opened, the temperature seemed to drop. The prison rose out of the landscape like something unnatural, low, wide, and absolute. No towers. No drama. Just reinforced concrete, steel, and silence. Processing was clinical. No shouting. No chaos. The man was stripped of his identity piece by piece. Clothes replaced, hair cut short, movements controlled down to inches. Guards spoke only when necessary. Every step echoed. Every door locked behind him with a sound that felt final, like punctuation at the end of a life. The cell was smaller than most closets. A concrete bed molded into the wall. A steel sink. A toilet with no seat. The window was a slit, angled so the mountains were visible but unreachable. 23 hours a day would be spent here. Alone. No cellmate. No conversations. No noise except the hum of ventilation and his own thoughts. At first, he welcomed it. Solitude felt like control. No rivals. No threats. No need to perform. But days blurred into weeks, and weeks into something harder to name. The silence grew louder. Time stretched and twisted. Sleep became irregular. Dreams bled into waking moments. Down the corridor, unseen by him, files were already being opened. Psych evaluations flagged early signs of dissociation. Guards logged unusual behavior, long periods of standing motionless, whispered conversations with no one there. The system called it adjustment. Former inmates had another word for it: unraveling. Then, during a routine inspection, something unexpected happened. A guard noticed markings scratched into the concrete wall, tiny, deliberate symbols hidden behind the bed frame. Not random. Not obsessive. Structured. Repeating. When analysts reviewed the pattern, their faces went pale. Because it wasn't madness etched into the wall. It was a message. And if they were reading it correctly, the man in the cell hadn't lost his mind at all. He'd been planning something. Inside the most secure prison on Earth. And whatever it was, it had already begun. By the time the markings were fully documented, scrubbed, and sealed behind red tape, ADX Florence had already done what it always did: closed ranks. The official report reduced the symbols to non-communicative behavior. Stress artifacts. A mind collapsing under isolation. But a small group of analysts inside the bureau knew better. Patterns don't happen by accident. And this pattern was too clean. Too intentional. The symbols weren't words. They were timing marks, etched not in sequence, but in intervals. The spacing told a story of patience. Someone with nothing but time had used it like a weapon. Dr. Elena Walsh was the first to say it out loud. A forensic psychologist with years of experience studying radicalization and prison cognition, she had seen breakdowns before. This wasn't one of them. He's anchoring himself, she said quietly, sliding the photographs across the table. This is how you preserve identity in isolation. Structure. Ritual. Control. The warden didn't like that answer. Control was supposed to belong to the prison. Security around the inmate was quietly increased. His 1 hour outside the cell was shifted to unpredictable times. Meals arrived without pattern. Guards rotated more frequently. Still, the behavior continued. No outbursts. No compliance issues. Just observation. Watching. Waiting. And then the first anomaly appeared. During a routine systems check, a technician flagged irregular data from one of the internal surveillance loops. Not missing footage, but repeated frames. A fraction of a second looping itself, invisible to the naked eye. Harmless on paper. Impossible in practice. ADX Florence didn't glitch. It was built not to. The investigation expanded, still silent, still internal. No alarms. No headlines. Agents began tracing every point of human contact the inmate had: medical staff, delivery routes, maintenance crews. On paper, nothing connected. In reality, the absence of connection was the problem. Meanwhile, inside the cell, the man adapted. Former inmates would later describe this phase as the most dangerous. The point where anger fades and calculation begins. His posture changed. His sleep stabilized. Requests to staff became precise, polite, forgettable. He followed every rule. He became invisible. That's when the letters started. Not from him, but about him. Anonymous envelopes began arriving at federal offices across 3 states. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside were photocopies of old case files, details never released to the public. Names of witnesses. Dates that had been sealed. And on the final page of each envelope, the same symbol appeared. The same one etched into the concrete wall at ADX Florence. The implication was unthinkable. ADX Florence was designed to sever communication. No phones. No internet. Mail was monitored, scanned, delayed. And yet, information tied directly to one inmate was moving freely beyond the walls. The pressure intensified. Dr. Walsh pushed for a direct evaluation. When she finally sat across from him in the interview room, a thick pane of reinforced glass between them, she felt it immediately, the calm. Not peace. Precision. "You know why you're here," she said. He smiled, just slightly. "Everyone thinks they know why they're here." She asked about the markings. About the isolation. About the hallucinations noted in his file. "I don't hallucinate," he replied. "I observe." She leaned forward. "Then help me understand what you're observing." For the first time since his arrival, he hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of choice. "ADX Florence," he said, "isn't a prison. It's a delay." That was all he offered. Days later, a corrections officer collapsed during a night shift. Non-fatal. No visible injuries. But when he regained consciousness, he couldn't explain where he'd been for 47 minutes, time missing from both his memory and the security logs. That was when the Bureau realized the truth was far worse than a breach. Someone wasn't trying to escape ADX Florence. They were proving they never needed to. And whatever final move was coming, the prison itself might not be able to stop it. By the time the Bureau admitted what was happening, it was already too late to undo it. ADX Florence was placed under a silent lockdown, not the kind announced over loudspeakers, but the kind that ripples through systems. External communications paused. Staff movements narrowed. Internal audits ran around the clock. On paper, everything still functioned. In reality, the prison was holding its breath. The missing 47 minutes became the center of the investigation. Analysts reconstructed every camera feed, every door sensor, every biometric log. The officer hadn't gone anywhere. He hadn't accessed restricted zones. He hadn't even left his post. Yet the timestamps didn't lie. Time had vanished inside the most time-controlled building in America. Dr. Walsh revisited the interview footage. She slowed it down frame by frame. That was when she noticed it, the pause before the inmate spoke about ADX Florence being a delay. Not hesitation. Calculation. He wasn't speculating. He was describing a process already in motion. The next letter arrived 3 days later. This one didn't go to a federal office. It went to a victim's family. Inside was an apology, carefully written, emotionally precise, and devastatingly informed. It referenced moments only the killer and the victims could have known. And at the bottom of the page, beneath the signature, was a date. A future date. Panic spread through agencies that never used that word. If the letter was authentic, it meant one thing. The inmate wasn't communicating outward from ADX Florence. Someone was communicating inward for him. They traced the date. It aligned with a routine maintenance shutdown scheduled months earlier, an automated systems pause designed to test redundancy. The prison had scheduled its own blind spot. When confronted, the inmate didn't resist. He didn't deny anything. He listened. "You can stop it," the warden said through the glass, voice tight. "Tell us who's helping you." The inmate shook his head slowly. "You misunderstand," he said. "No one is helping me. I taught them." He explained it without arrogance, without drama. Years earlier, before his arrest, he had designed systems, logistical frameworks meant to exploit predictability. He had studied institutions the way others studied weapons. Prisons. Courts. Governments. ADX Florence wasn't the first place he'd mapped. It was simply the last. Isolation hadn't broken him. It had refined him. The markings on the wall weren't messages. They were memory anchors, preserving a sequence only he could reconstruct. The repeated camera frames weren't hacks. They were human errors, nudged into place by suggestion, routine, and fatigue. The officer's missing time wasn't an attack. It was a test. The date on the letter marked the moment his influence would complete its loop. The Bureau shut down the maintenance test, locked every system manually, pulled staff off rotation. For 72 hours, ADX Florence became a sealed tomb. No automation, no external reliance. Nothing happened. No breach. No attack. No message. Relief swept through the command center. They believed they'd won. Then, on the 4th day, news broke in another state. A man confessed to a crime eerily similar to the one that had put the inmate in ADX Florence. Same structure. Same timing. Same psychological signature. The confession included details never released. The inmate was brought back into the interview room one last time. "You didn't give the order," Dr. Walsh said quietly. "So, how did it happen?" He met her eyes. "Isolation doesn't remove ideas," he said. "It protects them." ADX Florence had done exactly what it was designed to do, contain a body. It had never been designed to contain a mind. The cell door closed behind him with the same final sound it always made. Concrete. Steel. Certainty. But somewhere outside those walls, the pattern continued. And the most terrifying lesson of all settled in. Some prisons don't end crimes. They perfect them. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because some doors, once closed, never stop echoing.